This is Abby with the Heirloom Farmer here for the Attainable Garden Project episode 7. And I am in the greenhouse right now because the first thing that we need to do is go shopping for the plants that we're going to plant in our garden today. So today I'm going to cover weed management and bed updates and planting our garden now that it is the end of May and we're past our average last frost. The forecast is hot actually, so I am going to say we're good to go ahead and plant things like tomatoes, peppers, and other things that can't handle a frost. So the first thing that we're gonna do is go shopping here for our peppers and tomatoes. Now, as I've mentioned before, you can plant whatever you would like in this garden bed, but I'm going to be planting tomatoes and peppers today, and we'll be planting some more things next week. But for today, we're going to pick out some peppers and we're going to get some of the dwarf tomatoes. One of the things that we talked about, try not to have you wiggling around so much. One of the things that we talked about was not trellising tomatoes to make things just so much simpler. Not that it's hard to trellis tomatoes, but if you don't have the resources for a trellis, that is, sometimes a barrier. I do like to use cattle panel trellises, and leaving them up year after year makes it super easy. But if you don't have a trellis or you don't want to put one up, you can grow dwarf tomatoes or determinate tomatoes that typically do not require staking. I say typically because sometimes if they get heavy harvests of fruit on one side, they tend to lean over and you might want to stake them up, but they certainly don't need support like larger indeterminate tomatoes. All right, let's select some tomatoes and peppers. I'm going to pick out one of these Tiny Tim dwarf tomatoes. This is about as tall as they will get. They will start to get bushy, put on a lot more leaves, and then set their fruit. But this is typically as tall as they will get. These are Tiny Tim tomatoes. They will have a red cherry tomato on them. So I'm gonna grab one of these tomatoes. And then we're gonna go over to our other greenhouse for peppers. But we have lots of tomatoes to select from. If you would like to grow a different tomato other than Tiny Tim, that's totally fine. Just be prepared to provide support for that tomato. It is absolutely beautiful here at the farm and greenhouses this morning. I'm just loving it. All right, so we have a lot of peppers to choose from, and both sweet and hot peppers. One common concern people have is if you plant a sweet pepper and hot pepper next to each other, will the sweet peppers become hot? No, they won't. The only time this is a factor is if you are saving the seeds, and if they cross-pollinate when you plant the seeds next year, you may get a variation of the pepper plant that could be hot. However, just planting them side by side this year will not change the sweetness or hotness of those peppers. The peppers will be true to the mother plant, and that cannot change in their first year. That can only change due to cross-pollination when you plant seeds from that plant. So I'm going to choose a sweet pepper and a hot pepper and plant 2 pepper plants in our garden bed. I'm probably gonna go with the King of the North, which is a red bell pepper, although actually I may try these lipstick peppers. They're a pimento type pepper that are bright red. So I think I'll go with that. I do like bell peppers, but I think I'm gonna try something a little bit different. So we're gonna go with this lipstick pepper. And then we have several hot peppers, but I am going to plant one of these fish peppers. They are a hot pepper with similar in size and shape to a jalapeno, but they are beautiful as well, and they get a lot of variegation on the leaves and the peppers themselves. So they're also a stunning and beautiful plant. So I think that's what I'm going to choose for my hot pepper. All right, we will head out to the garden and talk about planting our peppers and tomatoes and some weed management. Okay, so I'm still plant shopping. I remembered that I wanted to talk about adding flowers to our garden bed. I know sometimes when you're really trying to grow a lot of food, especially in a small space, it can seem kind of silly to plant flowers. However, I think it's incredibly important to plant flowers. One, it adds beauty and enjoyment to your garden space, and I think it's really important to have a garden space that you enjoy. It also helps attract beneficial insects and pollinators, which are super important to having a healthy garden ecosystem and reducing pest pressure. But one of the things that you can consider, especially with a small space, is adding flowers that are also edible. So we're going to talk about a few options. The first option, and probably what I'm going to plant, is nasturtium. And we have several beautiful varieties of nasturtium, including Alaska, which has incredible marbled leaves, white and green leaves, and a variety of flowers. But the cool thing with nasturtium is it attracts beneficial insects, it adds beauty to your garden. Look at that water droplet there. But also the leaves and the flowers and the seeds, everything, the whole entire plant is edible. You can add the leaves and flowers to salads. You can use the flowers to decorate desserts. The leaves kind of have a peppery flavor, so you can use them to season other dishes. So many incredible things you can do with nasturtium. So I think I'm going to choose a nasturtium. Probably, like I said, I really like the Alaska, so I might pick Alaska mix, although I also like this pink blush. That's a tough decision there. Sweet alyssum, although not necessarily edible, is great for attracting beneficial insects, hoverflies, and other things that will especially help protect against aphids. Calendula, also great, gets beautiful orange flowers on them. The flowers are edible. In fact, calendula, especially this calendula alpha, is highly medicinal. So there's a lot of things that you can do with calendula. And again, the alpha is selected specifically for its medicinal qualities. It's also beautiful. There are other floral options that you could consider. I'm not going to plant any perennials in this bed. Perennials are flowers that come back year after year. I'm just choosing not to plant perennials, although you could. Echinacea and Coreopsis, especially the seashell Coreopsis, are excellent and beautiful options, along with yarrow. Just know that they will come back year after year and they will slowly spread. So again, you can plant those, just maybe not the best option for this particular small bed. Oh, here's what alyssum looks like when it's blooming. So I am going to, marigolds are another great option. But I'm gonna go with the nasturtium. So you can add whatever flowers you would like, but I do highly recommend adding those. Oh, that's right, I have Alaska salmon. I think I'll pick that one. It'll have the variegated leaves and salmon petals. So, all right, I think now I'm actually done shopping and we will head out to the garden. Welcome to the garden. Since last video, I did add a little bit more straw around the edges of the garden bed to help keep the weeds from creeping in at the edges. As I mentioned before, the edges are usually the place you have the most trouble with weeds using this method. So I just added a little bit more around the edges, and that has been super helpful. I haven't done any other weeding, so I just want to show you. There is a little bit of grass poking through, but I'm just gonna come through and pick that out and try and get the roots. Looks like a few dandelions poking through here. Same thing, I'm just gonna pull those out, but you can see because we're catching them small and because our compost is loose and they're not established, it's super easy to pull them out. So one of the things I like to do for weed management is to check frequently so that the weeds don't have a chance to get established. So I'm just gonna pick out any that I see, but again, this is the first I've weeded and it's not bad at all. Now, one of the other things that I like to do with this mulching method is to use my hoe, which I'm gonna show you here. You don't have to have this specific hoe, but I like to use this one here from Never Sink Farm. And the goal with this, or the idea with this, is any weeds that you can see easily, you want to pull out by hand. But then you use this hoe to just run across the surface of the soil to knock up, kind of pull up or dislodge any tiny weeds that are in the white thread stage or just in their germination stage, just by running this across the very surface of the garden bed. You don't want to go deep because that can stir up more weed seeds. You just want to go across the surface to disrupt any tiny weeds that are in their germination or fragile stage, and on a sunny, hot, dry day they will die and not come back. So I try to just run this across the surface of my soil once a week. Even if, and especially if you don't see weeds, that's the best time to do it, because when they're small like that, this will kill them off. So I'm trying to do it with one hand, which is not exactly easy, but so it's super easy to just run a hoe across once a week with a bed this size. It literally would take you 2 minutes, and then you're done with your weeding and maintenance for the week. If you're having a lot of weed pressure, the chances are that you did not add enough mulch and compost, but you can go back and add more now. If you're having problems with weeds, let me know and we can talk about some other possible solutions or causes, but you should not be having a lot of weed pressure with this method, which is one of the reasons I love it. All right, so we've got our weeding done and things are looking good. I've had a little bit of slug pressure, which is what's causing these leaves to be munched on. Now, kohlrabi are in the cabbage family or brassica family, so I'll be keeping an eye out for cabbage worms. If I do see any, I just smush them and move on. And that's the easiest thing I've found there. But this amount of pressure from the slugs, as long as it doesn't get any worse, these plants will be just fine. This lettuce here is looking great. The Swiss chard is looking good. With Swiss chard, it can be great to harvest when the leaves are still small and eat it kind of like spinach. When the leaves are small, they have a more mild flavor. When they get larger, they can have more of an earthy flavor, which is not a problem. I like it. Some people just don't enjoy how strong it gets when the leaves are larger. So you can literally start harvesting this now. Just harvest 1/3 of the plant at a time, or no more than 1/3 of the plant at a time. So I would probably just take like these 2 leaves here, these 2 leaves here, and maybe these 2 leaves here for now. But that'll actually encourage more growth as well. You could harvest any of these leaves now if you would like. I'm gonna let them grow a little bit more. It is getting pretty hot out for May, so you may notice some of your lettuce may have a little bit more of a bitter flavor to it. There's nothing wrong with that. You might want to just add a bit of a sweeter dressing to your salad. But to have the optimal flavor of lettuce, you do want to grow it during a cooler season, which typically that's May for us, but it's been very hot. So some of my lettuce has been a little more on the bitter side, but all of it has still been delicious and edible. But what I like to do with lettuce, which this lettuce here is definitely ready to harvest, so we're gonna harvest some of it. Some of the things I like to do with lettuce harvest. So I only harvest what I'm gonna eat in the next few days, unless it's gonna be really crazy weather, or if I think the lettuce is kind of to the end of its growing life, I'll go ahead and harvest it all. But for this, I'm probably just going to harvest 2 of these. In a few days I'll come back and harvest 2 more. A few days I'll harvest 2 more. But several key things I've found for harvesting lettuce. So ideally, you want to harvest it first thing in the morning, because it's going to have the best flavor and the most water content, which might sound a little weird. You're like, oh, I don't want watery lettuce, but water content means that the leaves will be full and crunchy and crisp. You want the water in the leaves. So harvest as soon as you can in the morning. But if you can't do that, that's okay. Harvest when you can harvest. It's just the best time is to harvest in the morning. Then the second thing that I highly recommend is that as soon as possible after harvest, you submerge the lettuce in cold water. This is going to help rehydrate the leaves. It's going to help create more crisp and crunchy leaves, and it will help get rid of any bugs that may have been hiding in the leaves and help you clean them. I will show you my process for that later. But because we're going to be planting some things in the garden, I'm actually going to harvest this lettuce right before I leave to take it into the kitchen. But this is definitely ready to harvest. All right, so next we're going to plant our peppers and tomato plant and our nasturtium, which is, I finally decided on nasturtium as my flower. All right, so again, ideally you want to plant in the cool of the day, in the evening, or in the morning, or in a cool cloudy day. I realize that's not always possible. In fact, it's not possible for me at the moment. So it's fairly early morning, but it's supposed to be a sort of hot day, which again is not ideal for planting. But the best time to plant is when you can plant. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna plant in these plants, and then we're gonna water them in really good. All right, let me get my tripod out so that you can see how I plant. All right, so in typical technology, technology's great. So I thought I recorded a whole video of me talking to you and planting these plants and watering them in. Turns out it didn't actually record. So here I am to tell you about planting tomatoes and peppers. So I planted the tomatoes and peppers down here at this end, giving them some pretty good space, about a square foot each. And I literally just used my hand to dig down in the compost in the soil, which was still very damp, which is great. It's holding water well. And I planted the peppers just a little bit deeper than they were already planted. And I planted the tomato plant just a few inches deeper, but not super deep. I did remove a few of the lower branches. When planting a tomato, sometimes you'll see recommendations to plant them kind of sideways so that you bury more of the stem. I actually don't recommend that, because if you damage the stem, if it snaps or breaks, then your plant is done for. So just plant it a little bit deeper, and that will be great. It will help it develop a really good root system. And then of course, be sure to label your plants so that you know what they are. And I went ahead and watered them in. Even though the soil was damp, I wanted to give them a really good start in the garden. So I watered them in, and that's it. We're good to go. It took me maybe 5 minutes to plant those and 2 minutes to weed the garden, and we're done and we're set. If you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions. I am going to harvest the lettuce now and hopefully get that on video for you. So when I harvest the lettuce, well, there's two options for harvesting lettuce. So you can cut off leaves, and depending on the type of lettuce, it will continue to grow back, like a cut and come again lettuce, where you can remove outer leaves, and it will continue growing from the center. And when you do that, you want to remove about 1/3 of the leaves on the plant so that it will continue growing. These both are head lettuces, and I'm going to go ahead and harvest the entire thing. So when you do that, you can use scissors or a knife, and you're going to want to pull back the leaves and cut at the base, just above the surface of the soil, and you can pull out the entire head of lettuce. And that's beautiful. I am going to go ahead and remove some of the outer leaves, and I'm just going to add them to the edge of my garden to act as more mulch and compost. But again, you know, you can just harvest a few leaves, or you can harvest the entire head. If you harvest the entire head like this, that's it for that plant. It's not going to come back. And now I do encourage you to leave the root system in the soil. That will continue helping to feed the soil life, and it won't interfere with anything that we plant in the future. And I'm going to do the same thing with harvesting this head lettuce over here. This is Tom Thumb. The first one I harvested was a Butter Crunch variety. So both head lettuces. So I harvested the whole thing, plus with it getting hot, I'm harvesting a little bit more of my lettuce, and then I'll plant some more heat resistant varieties. All right, and now I'll take these home and get them in some cold water as soon as possible. All right, we are here in my kitchen with lettuce that we harvested from the garden just a little bit ago. And again, the key is to do this as soon as possible after harvest. So I highly recommend having a lettuce spinner, especially if you're going to grow especially if you're going to grow lettuce in your garden. This is super helpful I think I purchased it on Amazon for maybe $25. Well worth the purchase. I use this all of the time. So what I usually do is I run really cold water, and with head lettuce especially, I kind of start to pull it apart leaf by leaf. I discard any leaves that I don't want to eat. If there's a little bit of munching on it, that's okay. At least that's okay with me, but that's, you know, your preference. If there's a lot of munching on them or blemishes, I will compost it and feed it to our composting worms so it doesn't go to waste. But what I do is I just will start pulling the leaves off and running them under the cold water as an initial rinse to get any, I'm going to discard that one, so I'm going to set it here in this thing, but to get any dirt or straw off of there, and then I put it right into the spinner. Again, I'm just going to discard a few of these really rough looking ones. But the rest of these, I'm just going to rinse off and put into the lettuce spinner. If you don't have a lettuce spinner, you can just do this into a bowl, but you do want something that will hold water. Definitely make sure you're using cold water. And you may see a few bugs. That's part of having a living, active, beautiful garden. So just rinse those off. And when we soak the leaves, any bugs that you may not have seen will float to the top. Not to gross anyone out, but then you will know that you don't have any more bugs. And sometimes when I get to the bottom like this with head lettuce, I will grab a knife and just cut the bottom part off so that the leaves come apart. You can leave the head together, but I find this way it gets a lot more crispy, and I make sure that it's clean and free of critters. Excuse me. Alright, I'm going to do that same thing with this one. Just pulling a few of the outer leaves off. One of the things that we're doing with the water, especially the cool water, is we're cooling the lettuce down and rehydrating it so that it stays crisp and has a good flavor. If you struggled with lettuce in your garden in the past, usually two of the common things are either the variety, or like if it gets just wilt after you harvest it and it's floppy and not enjoyable to eat, it could be that it was not hydrated very well. So again, that's why we want to harvest in the cool of the day and get it rehydrated as soon as possible. And then once I've done an initial rinse and have the leaves pulled apart, actually I have a few spinach leaves here that I'm going to add in. Okay, now I'm going to fill the entire bowl of my lettuce spinner with cold water. Again, you want to make sure that it's cold, and we're going to fill this up and leave it set for at least 10 minutes. If it's really hot when you harvested, you are going to definitely want to make sure you let it soak longer. And you can do this with a lot of vegetables. Even I'll do this with cucumbers, summer squash. I'll bring them in. Sometimes I'll just fill my entire sink with water and soak the vegetables in there, and that'll prevent mushy, rubbery, sad looking produce. So just fill it all the way up to the top. Kind of mix, gently mix it all around to loosen up if there was any dirt or bugs that escaped my first rinse through. And then I will leave that sit. If your lettuce likes to float to the top too much, you can take a bowl or a plate and press it in on top of your lettuce, fill it with water, and it'll help keep your lettuce submerged. And then just leave it there for at least 10 minutes. When you come back, rinse it out, remove any critters that might have surfaced, rinse it out 1 or 2 more times. If you see a lot of dirt, you can do this whole process 1 more time to make sure it's clean. But my lettuce looks pretty clean today, so I'm gonna just let it soak, rinse it, drain it, and then run it through the lettuce spinner. And that's it. So thank you for joining me today for this garden video. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will be back next week when we plant more in our garden.